Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the inaugural forum of the Association for the Advancement of North Caucasus Studies. And the abbreviation reads as ANCS. ANCS, that's right? I'm talking to my team here, even though Diego, the vice president of this association, suggested to say ANCS. So we are still debating whether it's ANCS. You can, by the way, put your opinion in the chat, whether it's ANCS or ANCS. Okay. So my name is Lidia Zhigunova, and I'm a senior professor of practice in the Department of Comparative Literature and the director of the Russian program in the same department at Tulane University in New Orleans. I am also president and co-founder of ANCS. I would like to begin by thanking Princeton University Department of Near Eastern Studies for hosting us today, our speakers and participants for agreeing to join us, and especially my colleagues and fellow founders of this association, Diego Benning Wong, the vice president, Alika Zangieva, the secretary, Sarah Sly, director of coordination, and all of our board members. You can see them listed on the program for working tirelessly over the past several months to make this event possible. It is truly an honor to see so many colleagues, scholars, students, community members, and friends gathered here today, both in person and online, to celebrate the beginning of a new intellectual endeavor. Today is in many ways a historic moment, and not because we are creating something entirely new, but because we are finally giving a name, a structure, and an institutional home to a scholarly community that has existed for many years, often in fragmented and isolated ways. Scholars have been working in the North Caucasus, in North America for decades. In the 1950s and 60s, the region entered the academy largely through Soviet studies, examined as a problem of national policy, nationality policy, Islam, and center-periphery relations, rarely on its own terms. Then came what we might call the Benningsen School. Alexander Benningsen and his collaborators pioneered serious scholarship on Islam and Muslim identities in the Soviet Union, including the North Caucasus, and their work profoundly influenced the generation of North American researchers, even though they were based in France. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the wars in Chechnya brought new urgency and new scholars. In the last 2 decades, there has been an explosion of publications of scholarly and academic literature on the Caucasus, on the North Caucasus in particular. Over the past decade, scholarship has expanded into indigenous studies, decolonial theory, diaspora studies, memory studies, language revitalization, and gender studies. And yet the scholarship and this region itself is rarely discussed. For too long, scholars working on the North Caucasus have been dispersed across disciplines, departments, and institutions. Some of us have been housed within Russian and Eurasian studies, others within Middle Eastern studies, anthropology, history, linguistics, political science, religious studies, and comparative literature. We have often encountered one another only accidentally at conferences through publications or through mutual acquaintances. Yet we have all shared a common experience, the realization that the North Caucasus has remained remarkably invisible within existing academic frameworks. Too often, the region has been subsumed under broader categories such as Russia or Eurasia, obscuring its distinct histories, languages, cultures, and intellectual traditions. Most existing academic organizations that engage with the Caucasus today focus primarily on the South, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. While the North Caucasus is routinely subsumed under Russian studies, where it often appears as a peripheral security problem rather than a region with its own ancient civilizations, distinct peoples, rich languages, and deep histories. When the North Caucasus appears in Western scholarship and in media, it is often through a Russian lens defined by conflict, terrorism, or instability rather than on its own terms. At the same time, the South Caucasus has rightly received increasing scholarly attention over the past decades. Important institutional infrastructure have emerged around Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Georgian studies. This has been an extremely positive development. American Research Institute for the South Caucasus, for example, is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. We congratulate them on this important milestone, applaud their accomplishments, and hope for future collaborations. ANCS wants to address this imbalance by focusing on the North Caucasus and highlighting its connections to the South, because the invisibility of the North Caucasus has consequences. When a region remains understudied, others begin to speak for it. Complex societies become reduced to security concerns. Rich cultural traditions become flattened into stereotypes. Nuanced histories become simplified into narratives of conflict and instability. The North Caucasus frequently appears in global discourse only in moments of crisis. Yet the region is so much more than that. It is a place of extraordinary linguistic diversity. It is a place of deep philosophical traditions, sophisticated systems of customary law, rich oral literature, artistic expression, and centuries of intercultural exchange. It is also a region profoundly shaped by imperial expansion, colonial violence, displacement, and diaspora. So before we speak about North Caucasus studies, we should perhaps pause and ask a very basic question. What is the North Caucasus? For many people, even within academia, the answer is surprisingly unclear. The North Caucasus is not an isolated region. It is an integral part of the broader Caucasus, a mountainous region situated between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea that has long served as crossroads between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The Greater Caucasus mountain range is often described as a boundary separating the North and South Caucasus. Politically, this is true today. The mountain chain forms an international border that separates the Russian Federation from Georgia and Azerbaijan. But culturally and historically, the story is far more complex. The mountains have never been an impermeable barrier. For centuries, peoples on both sides of the range have been connected through trade, migration, kinship networks, and shared cultural traditions. Concepts such as hospitality, honor, communal responsibility, oral storytelling, dance traditions, and mountain ethics transcend contemporary political borders. In many ways, the Caucasus should be understood not simply as a divided region, but as an interconnected space of extraordinary diversity. At the same time, we must acknowledge that the North Caucasus has experienced a particularly difficult modern history. During the 19th century, following decades of resistance to Russian imperial expansion, known as the Caucasian War, many indigenous peoples of the North Caucasus, including Circassians, Chechens, and Dagestanis, were subjected to devastating military campaigns, forced displacement, and mass migration. And for the Circassians in particular, the end of the Russian Circassian War was part of the Caucasian War in 1864, resulted in the deportation of the vast majority of the indigenous population to the Ottoman Empire, creating one of the world's largest and oldest diasporas. The consequences of these events continue to shape communities today in the region itself and beyond, across Turkey, Jordan, Syria, Europe, and North America. The language we use to describe geography also matters. Historically, the term Northwest Caucasus referred to the indigenous Circassian homelands along the northeastern Black Sea coast. Yet over time, this terminology has increasingly disappeared from official discourse and has often been replaced by administrative labels such as South Russia. This seemingly simple shift in terminology has profound implications. So when regions are renamed, histories can be obscured. When indigenous names disappear, connections between peoples and places become more difficult to sustain. When geographic terms are replaced by administrative ones, entire historical narratives risk being erased. Part of our responsibility as scholars is to recover these histories and restore complexity to our understanding of the region. Today, the North Caucasus within the Russian Federation consists of 7 Soviet-era republics: Adygea, Karachay-Cherkessia, Kabardino-Balkaria, North Ossetia, Alania, Ingushetia, Chechnya, Dagestan, as well as 2 administrative territories or krais, Krasnodar Krai and Stavropol Krai. Yet even these contemporary administrative boundaries cannot fully capture the historical and cultural landscapes of the region. The North Caucasus is simultaneously a geographic region, a historical place, a linguistic mosaic, a site of imperial encounters, and a transnational network sustained by millions of people living in diaspora communities around the world. And this is precisely why North Caucasus studies matters, because without dedicated scholarship, the region risks remaining fragmented into separate national, ethnic, and security narratives rather than being understood as a dynamic and interconnected whole. Our goal is not to create another isolated academic field. Rather, it is to create an intellectual home where historians, anthropologists, linguists, literary scholars, political scientists, artists, educators, students, and members of diaspora communities can come together to build a richer and more nuanced understanding of the region. After all, knowledge itself is a form of preservation. And perhaps one of the most important things we can do today is to create spaces where histories can be discussed freely, where difficult questions can be asked openly, and where multiple voices can coexist without fear. That ultimately is the vision behind ANCS. And this brings me to another reason why ANCS is so urgent, because many of the historical narratives concerning the North Caucasus have been tightly controlled for generations. Historical memory has often been politicized. Certain subjects have remained difficult or dangerous to discuss openly. Local historians, journalists, and intellectuals have faced constraints on what can be researched, taught, and publicly debated. As a result, free and informed discourse has often been limited. Young people often face a stifling atmosphere in which freedoms are restricted and opportunities are limited. Instead of encouraging creativity and engagement with global conversations, societies often retreat into polarization, religious fanaticism, or the revival of outdated practices presented as immutable traditions. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has only intensified this isolation. Meanwhile, the diaspora continues to grow. As I mentioned earlier, the North Caucasus has one of the largest diasporas in the world, originating largely from the 19th century Caucasus War, and the policies of the Russian Empire and the Russian Federation today continues these policies and approaches to the region. Millions of Circassians, along with Chechens, Dagestanis, Abazas, Abkhaz, and others, now live outside the ancestral homeland and not by choice. Many have limited or no access to those lands. Russia does not recognize them as indigenous peoples with collective rights of return. The two Chechen wars created additional displacement. More recently, Russia's war against Ukraine has generated another wave of exile. So today, many people remain separated from their homes, families, and communities. The consequences extend far beyond the region itself. They also affect diaspora communities. But yet, this is only one side of the story. Of the past, the other side of the story is actually quite positive. Over the past 3 decades, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the North Caucasus has also been a remarkable laboratory of social, cultural, and intellectual change. Across the region, grassroots activists, civil society organizations, language revitalization initiatives, cultural movements, independent media platforms, and diaspora networks have emerged and in many cases flourished despite difficult circumstances. People have worked to recover historical memory, revive indigenous languages, preserve traditional arts and music, document local histories, establish cultural institutions, and reconnect fragmented communities across borders and continents. And yet, much of this activity has remained largely invisible, both within Russia and to Western audiences alike. The region continues to be viewed through narrow frameworks that privilege Moscow-centered narratives or reduce the North Caucasus to questions of security, insurgency, or instability. As a result, many important stories of resilience, creativity, and self-organization have gone unnoticed. Entire generations of scholars, artists, educators, and activists have been building vibrant intellectual and cultural spaces, often without international recognition or meaningful institutional support. And this is precisely where ANCS hopes to intervene. One of our goals is not simply to produce new scholarship, but to make visible what already exists, to amplify overlooked voices, connect fragmented networks of knowledge, and create a space where the diverse experiences, histories, and aspirations of the peoples of the North Caucasus can be studied, discussed, and understood in all their complexity. So the story of the North Caucasus of the past 30 years is not only a story of repression, it is also a story of extraordinary resilience and creativity and persistence. So we believe that also that many tensions, the tensions and divisions we see today in the region itself and within the North Caucasus diaspora communities stem from a lack of opportunities for critical engagement and open dialogue. When knowledge is inaccessible, myths fill the gaps. When histories are suppressed, competing narratives emerge. And when spaces for intellectual exchange are absent, polarization and radicalization becomes easier. And this is precisely where ANCS hopes to make a meaningful contribution. Our role is not to tell communities, what to think, and it's not to advocate for any particular political agenda. Rather, our role is to create a trusted space where rigorous scholarship, critical inquiry, and open dialogue can flourish. We want to bridge academia and the communities we serve. We want to provide evidence-based perspectives and to make scholarship more accessible. We want to empower communities through knowledge. And at the same time, we recognize that this requires balance. ANCS is committed to engaging with diaspora organizations and cultural institutions while maintaining academic rigor, intellectual independence, and institutional autonomy. These principles are central to our mission. In many ways, we envision ANCS as a modern scholarly association, but it is not only an academic society, but also a bridge between scholarship, public engagement, and diaspora communities. And we believe these worlds should not exist in isolation from one another, and our communities deserve access to scholarship. Our students deserve access to mentors, and our scholars deserve access to intellectual home. So as someone who was born in and raised in Nalchik in Kabardino-Balkaria, this mission is deeply personal to me. Like many people from the North Caucasus, I have witnessed how often the region disappears from conversations about itself. I have seen how categories imposed from the outside can erase complexity and diminish local voices. I have also witnessed tremendous resilience. I have seen communities preserve languages under difficult circumstances. I have seen traditions survive displacement. And I have seen diasporas sustain memories across continents. Today, and I have seen also scholars dedicated their careers to bringing these stories into view. And today we're bringing many of these people together. ANCS aims to create a sustainable scholarly infrastructure for the future. We will organize lectures, workshops, conference panels, and annual conferences. We will also develop teaching resources, syllabi on the Caucasus and North Caucasus in particular, syllabi and digital repositories. We will create opportunities for collaboration among established scholars, graduate students, and early career researchers. We will foster conversations across disciplines and across borders. But today it is also about celebrating what already exists. We are fortunate to have assembled an extraordinary group of scholars, advisors, senior advisors, and board members from across North America and beyond. And I'm deeply grateful to all of my colleagues who have invested their time, energy, and experience into this initiative. And if you allow me, I don't know how I'm doing on time. So I have a kind of a short personal reflection and why this organization matters to me in this project. So allow me to share a personal reflection. I'm Circassian, as I said. I was born and raised in Nalchik in the Republic of Kabardino-Balkaria, one of the 7 republics that today make up the North Caucasus within the Russian Federation. Yet growing up during the late Soviet period and coming of age in post-Soviet Russia, I rarely encountered the history of my own region or of my own people in any meaningful way within the educational institutions around me. Despite living in the North Caucasus, I learned remarkably little about its indigenous peoples, their histories, or their experiences. The region that I called home was in many ways absent from the very system that were meant to educate us about our past. The republics themselves were largely invisible, not only to the outside world, but even to those of us who lived there. Our history textbooks contained almost no information about the indigenous peoples of the region. We learned a highly sanitized version of history, one that was carefully curated and controlled. All subjects were taught in Russian, and local histories, languages, and perspectives occupied only a marginal space in our education. Soviet nationality policies profoundly shaped how many peoples of the North Caucasus came to understand themselves and how they were represented to others through administrative boundaries, ethnonyms, language reforms, alphabet changes, and officially sanctioned historical narratives. The Soviet state institutionalized particular versions of identity that were politically convenient or easier to govern. While many of these categories were built upon existing ethnic, linguistic, and regional identities, they often simplified, reconfigured, and fragmented much more fluid historical realities. As a result, generations grew up inheriting state-produced narratives about who we were, who we had been, and even who we expected to become. Narratives that did not always reflect the complexity of our histories, our interconnectedness, or our own understanding of ourselves. Most strikingly, many of us did not even know, about the catastrophe our ancestors had endured in the 19th century. We were not taught about the long wars of resistance against the Russian imperial expansion. We were not taught about the mass deportations, the destruction of indigenous communities, and the creation of one of the largest diasporas. We simply grew up with silence, and silence too is a form of historical narrative. In many ways, my own academic journey began with a simple question: who are we? I eventually moved to the United States to continue my education, but what I was truly searching for was not simply another degree. I was searching for an understanding of my own place, my own history, my own people. Ironically, I had to move thousands of miles away from home to begin learning about home. I had to leave the North Caucasus in order to discover the North Caucasus. And here in North America, I encountered historians, linguists, anthropologists, political scientists, and literary scholars who had dedicated decades of their lives to studying the region. Many of them had traveled extensively throughout the Caucasus. They had lived among North Caucasian communities, learned local languages, read local historians, and immersed themselves in cultures that remained largely invisible within mainstream academic discourse. They took the region seriously. They recognized its complexity, and they produced extraordinary scholarship. At the same time, I also came to understand another paradox. Knowledge about the North Caucasus certainly exists. Local historians, journalists, writers, and scholars continue to produce important work within the region itself, but too often this knowledge remains inaccessible, marginalized, or overshadowed by Moscow-centric frameworks that continue to dominate both public and academic narratives. As a result, the North Caucasus is frequently spoken about rather than spoken with. It is interpreted from the outside rather than understood from within. Our task is not to replace one dominant narrative with another. Our task is to create spaces where multiple voices can coexist, spaces where difficult histories can be discussed honestly, spaces where disagreement is not a threat, but a necessary component of intellectual growth. And most importantly, spaces where younger generations will not have to leave home in order to learn about home. Ultimately, this organization is not simply about creating another scholarly association. It is about repairing a rupture between scholarship and communities, a rupture between history and memory, between local knowledge and global conversations. And perhaps in some small way, it is also about giving future generations something many of us did not have, an intellectual home where the North Caucasus is not an afterthought, a footnote, or a security problem, but a subject worthy of study on its own terms. And thank you so much. This would conclude my opening remarks.